Media wars: the West, the Middle East, and the battle for narrative.
The president and Israeli officials say a joint attack on Iran early this morning killed the country's reigning supreme leader and some of his family. Now, President Trump says that the assassination now gives the Iranian people their, quote, greatest chance to take their country back.
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei در راه سربلندی حرم جمهوری اسلامی ایران شهد گوارای شهادت را نوشیدند و به ملکوت اعلی پیوستند.
The Hook: two feeds, two realities. It's early March 2026. A few days ago, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed. And within minutes, my phone turned into a split screen of two different realities. On BBC, footage from London, crowd celebrations, studio analysis, and commentators discussing the geopolitical implication and whether the strike will shift the balance of power. On Al Jazeera, mourning crowds in Iran, people carrying black banners, commentators talking about martyrdom and regional instability. Same event, very different emotional atmospheres. That contrast stuck with me. Seeing that side by side made something quite obvious. The way conflict appears often depends on where the story is being told. More than a military conflict, I started to decipher a struggle over interpretation over who defines what just happened and what it means. And when you zoom out, that struggle stretches far beyond the past week's headlines. In this essay, we unpack the media battle lines between Western outlets, mainly the United States, Britain, France, Israel, and media ecosystems across the Middle East. Sometimes the difference is subtle. Sometimes it's dramatic. Once you see the patterns, you cannot unsee them. Understanding those patterns help explain why audiences around the world walk away from the same event with completely different interpretations. Framing: how meaning gets built. One useful place to start is a 2021 study from Leiden University, Media Bias in English Language Newspaper, about Iran's nuclear program. The thesis compares coverage in major American and British newspapers. Several patterns show up repeatedly. Articles frequently relied on Western political elites and security officials as primary sources. Iran appeared mainly in discussions of nuclear risk and regional stability. Language connected to threat perception showed up often. That kind of editorial choice influences how readers and viewers interpret events. Communication scholar Robert Entman, Framing Theory, explained this process clearly. Media outlets shape interpretation by selecting certain elements of reality and giving them more prominence. Certain angles, sources, metaphors shape interpretation. Media outlets decide what becomes central and what fades in the background. If the dominant vocabulary revolves around nuclear danger and regional aggression, audiences internalize that architecture of meaning and understand primarily through that lens. On the other end, Iranian state media uses a different vocabulary: sovereignty, resistance, foreign interference. The same geopolitical situation ends up being narrated through a completely different set of priorities. As of recent, I recommend an article published on March 14 in Al Jazeera Journalism Review, Missiles Made of Words: How Western Media Narratives Shape the Iran, Israel, and US Conflict. It's a good review of the current media landscape, the vocabulary, the angles, the politics of language used in Western media, and how it frames the ongoing conflicts. Each system produces coherence according to its priorities and for its audience. The 2025 strikes: divergent coverage in real time. The Israeli strikes on Iran in 2025 offer a clear example of these contrasts. Western coverage, summarized by Euronews, emphasized operational details, precision targeting, strategic messaging, and the potential impact on Iran's military leadership. Iranian outlets describe the damage as limited and frame the attack within a broader narrative of foreign hostility. It's important to note that Arab media did not respond with a single unified interpretation. Reporting gathered by the media line showed widely varying reactions across the region. Gulf outlets often focused on regional stability and escalation risk. Some commentators placed the event within the long-standing rivalry between Iran and several Arab governments. Others concentrated on potential civilian impact and vulnerability. Foreign policy documented a similar range of reactions after the killing of Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani in 2020. Public condemnation appeared in some countries while officials in others quietly welcomed the development. Academic research reinforced this complexity. A SAGE study demonstrates how interregional rivalries shape coverage in the Middle East. Saudi, Qatari, Iranian, and Lebanese outlets often frame identical events differently based on domestic and strategic interests. So when Western and Middle Eastern coverage diverge, it reflects overlapping political agendas, historical tensions, and audience expectations. Iraq, the template years later. The war on Iraq still serves as one of the clearest examples of narrative divergence in modern conflict coverage. The study, A Tale of Two Wars, analyzed coalition country news sites and Arab world outlets during the invasion. Coalition country outlets often emphasized the removal of Saddam Hussein and the promise of stability, liberation, removal of dictatorship, and security objectives. On the Arab side, they focus more heavily on civilian casualties, occupation, and the political legitimacy of such invasion. Later reporting added another layer to the story. Several major Western publications acknowledged problems with their early coverage of the weapons of mass destruction narrative. The New York Times even published an editor note acknowledging flaws in its reporting. That moment triggered a wider debate about how news institutions interact with government narratives during wartime. This echo still appears in contemporary coverage of Iran and regional conflicts, Israel, Palestine, and narrative language. Coverage of Israel and Palestine illustrates another case of how language influences perception. As mentioned in my video about media imperialism, words such as retaliation, clashes, militants frame events in particular ways. It does influence how audiences assign responsibility or sympathy. Regional outlets, including Arab news, often foreground humanitarian impact and the question of occupation. Western outlets frequently begin with Israeli security concerns before expanding the story to include Palestinian casualties and infrastructure damage. Research on conflict reporting consistently shows that narrative sequencing shapes emotional alignments. Indeed, the first frame introduced often anchors audience interpretation. Those early cues guide how the rest of the story is interpreted, and it's crucial we keep it in mind. Information warfare in the digital age. We're in a radically different media environment than in 2003. Military conflict now unfolds alongside algorithmic amplification. Conflict reporting unfolds alongside a constant stream of social media footage, government statements, leaked intelligence briefings, and think tank analysis, especially in the West. Meanwhile, Iran has experienced information blackouts during periods of unrest, which makes independent verification difficult. Regional outlets sometimes operate under political or ideological constraints of their own. Social media accelerate this divide. Social media platforms distribute emotionally resonant clips faster than contextual reporting. Audiences curate feeds aligned with their worldview. Information dominance has become a strategic objective in itself. Imperial legacy and narrative gravity. Colonial history still shapes narrative hierarchies. Britain's involvement in Iranian oil politics during the 20th century remains part of Iranian political memory. France's colonial history in North Africa continues to shape regional perception of Western involvement. The United States military campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan form another layer of context. These histories influence whose authority feels legitimate in coverage and whose sovereignty appears conditional. Media institutions inherit cultural memory. Journalists and editors operate within institutions that carry long-standing cultural assumptions. So then that institutional memory influences tone, skepticism, and assumptions about stability or volatility, as well as how risk, legitimacy, and sovereignty are discussed. Over time, those patterns become familiar narrative structures. Regional complexity. The Middle East contains multiple competing media systems that reflect a diverse political landscape. It is not a monolith. Saudi media frequently frames Iran as destabilizing. Qatari outlets approach regional rivalries differently. Lebanese media reflect sectarian divisions. Even within the same organizations, differences appear. Al Jazeera Arabic and English editions differ in emphasis and tone. The region hosts its own narrative competition, just as in Western media. The Palestine Chronicle reported on March 15 that major Western outlets increasingly portrayed Trump's war on Iran as strategically confused, politically costly, internationally isolating, and unpopular. Understanding that complexity prevents oversimplification. How to navigate it? Critical media literacy in this landscape requires comparing multiple outlets. Reading or watching multiple outlets exposes differences in vocabulary, sourcing, and emphasis. Tracking sourcing patterns. Watching for emotional language. Identifying which actors are foregrounded. Government officials, military analysts, civilians, international organizations. Who is centered and who is given the floor first. Audiences participate in these ecosystems. Our clicks, shares, and watch time shape incentives. Viewing habits and sharing behavior influence which stories gain traction and which ones disappear from the feeds. It is safe to say that our attention is the actual battlefield. In conclusion, different feeds, one event. The contrast between those two news feeds still stands out. Celebrations in London, mourning in Tehran. Both reactions emerged from real communities. Each reflected a different narrative structure. Wars are also won in newsrooms, and media conflicts determine meaning. And this is our collective responsibility. This is where we have to be hypervigilant because that meaning actually shapes what comes next.